What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the Next Generation Podcast.
We're your hosts. My name is Blake.
And I am Will.
And today we are going to be discussing how SpaceX is saving Ukraine. So, you might be wondering, how is SpaceX saving Ukraine? So, SpaceX owns a company called Starlink. Starlink is an internet service provider like AT&T or Verizon, and they are developed and manufactured by SpaceX.
So, unlike most companies that use cell towers, these people, SpaceX, uses satellites.
Yeah, so as of March, there are about 4,161 Starlink satellites currently in orbit.
Approximately.
I mean, it's more now. That's how much it was in March. And obviously, new ones launch every week or so.
So, half of the satellites in orbit are Starlink, so ever launched. And
yeah, which is pretty crazy. I mean, so many things in our daily lives happen because of satellites. You may not realize it, but it's true. TV, all that kind of stuff. So to think that half of all the satellites in orbit are Starlink satellites is pretty crazy.
And the fact that you probably never heard of Starlink is even crazier.
Yeah. So you can get Starlink for yourself. All you need to get is a small dish that points itself at the sky, and it tracks all the satellites that go past the sky, and they send internet to your devices.
However, Starlink isn't like your traditional satellite. So you want to talk about how they're different?
Yeah, so the traditional geostationary satellite orbits at geostationary orbit, which is about 22,000 miles from the surface of the Earth. And geostationary orbit is the point at which, when you orbit, you stay over a specific point on Earth. So we talked about this in our episode about space elevators.
Yeah. And you can actually run a test on this. We should leave the website in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But geostationary orbit is a certain height at which, when you're orbiting, you're going at the same speed at which the Earth is rotating. So if you have a satellite in geostationary orbit, it's going to be directly over a certain area
the whole time.
Exactly. But if you have a satellite that's lower or higher, it's going to move around and not stay over a certain place.
So they normally use geostationary orbit because it's more reliable and it just stays in the same area.
Exactly. And
however, like we touched on, it's 22,000 miles above their surface, which is a really, really far away. And even though signals can travel really fast, it is still quite a large distance to cover. So
the true benefit of Starlink is that there are so many of them. That means that Starlink can orbit much lower than the traditional geostationary satellite. They orbit at about 340 miles compared to
22,000.
It's pretty ridiculous how low they are. They're in LEO, which stands for low Earth orbit. And the reason that they are able to orbit so much lower than a traditional satellite is because there are so many of them, like we were saying before. Half of the satellites in orbit are made up of Starlink satellites.
Yeah, so when you're okay, well, this is not going to stay in the same place, so these satellites are just going to be moving around the Earth the whole time. So how is that going to be reliable with your service provider? Well, for now, you might be on one, but then once that zooms by, because there's so many, another one will fill its spot, and you get good service from all of the satellites. However, it's so much closer and your signal has to travel less, making it much faster internet.
Yeah, so there's thousands of Starlink satellites in orbit above Earth, and they're always zipping across the skies, and they form a web. And so when Will was saying, when one satellite is above you, you're getting internet from that satellite. But once that satellite flies over the horizon, another satellite flies into view, and you're suddenly getting internet from that satellite. And the reason they can do this is because there's so many of them. Right? And there are new satellites being launched every week. I would estimate about 60 every week. They launch about 60 with every Falcon 9 launch. There's a story that I want to briefly tell. It was this winter, I believe.
Why doesn't he tell me any of the cool stories?
I've told you this story.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he actually has. This is cool.
Yeah, so it was earlier this winter. I was getting ready for hockey practice. I load my stuff into the car. This is nighttime, of course.
Is this when I picked you up?
No. But there's this giant line of white dots zooming across the sky. And for someone if let's say I was someone who didn't know about satellites and how they're launched, I would think it was a UFO or something like that.
Yeah, and we're not going to leak our location, but this is very rare for where we live. Like, it wouldn't make sense. It doesn't make that much sense.
Well,
Given where they are launched, it just seems a little bit. I mean,
shush.
My bad. I'm interrupting his cool story.
And I looked up. There's like dozens and dozens of white dots going across the sky, and I presume that these were Starlink satellites that had just been launched, because right after they're launched, they're all in a giant cluster together, and they make a giant line of white dots going across the sky. And you can tell they're satellites because, number one, they're moving really fast, and number two, they don't have any other blinking red or green lights like an airplane would. And so that's how you can identify a satellite in the sky. If you go and if you're like stargazing or something, it's fairly easy to spot satellites if you have a good enough eye. They're, like I was saying before,
at least 19.5 out of 20 vision required.
No, that's not true. But yeah.
That's Blake's cool story. He saw a bunch of Starlink satellites.
There's lots of satellites in orbit, and there's many launched every week. So the question is, what are the benefits of having Starlink?
So there are two main benefits of having Starlink. So first, Starlink satellites cover the entire world because they're constantly zipping around the whole globe, which means you have coverage anywhere. So like we talked about in our last episode about 5G, you only have service when you're near cell towers. And there aren't very many cell towers in some rural areas, or not everywhere across the globe.
Yeah, especially if you're in an airplane or if you're on a boat, there's no cell tower right next to you.
There's no cell tower near you. But there's always a satellite flying over you because there are so many. So you will have coverage anywhere you go, which is life-changing for a lot of people.
Yeah, for those that live in rural areas where these large internet service providers aren't incentivized to build cell towers.
Because that isn't a smart business move.
Yeah, it's people who live there are really good, are prime customers for Starlink because there's a need.
Yeah, exactly. They know they're not going to get any like cell towers from other companies. However, they can still have service because of this.
Yeah. And soon, or I think now currently, Starlink is selling special versions of their satellite dishes for boats and planes, like I was saying earlier. So if you're on a flight or if you're on a boat, you can still get internet, which is pretty cool. So the second benefit of Starlink is latency.
This is actually, you can run a test on the latency compared to a normal one.
Yeah,
and this is mind-blowing.
Yeah,
so
on the Starlink website, they have a little thing where you can see the latency difference between Starlink and traditional geostationary orbit satellites.
So first explain what latency is.
Yeah, so latency is the round-trip time it takes to send and receive data. So let's say you make a request, like you tap on a website. Latency is the time that it takes for the website to actually open. So that signal, that message needs to be sent to the node, in which case it's a satellite, and back.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, like we talked about, and this is the benefit of having a much lower orbit. Yeah. So, like we talked about, how there's the normal satellite dishes or satellites are 22,000 feet above Earth's surface.
20,000 miles.
Miles, crazy. And the Starlink ones are only 340. The round trips are much faster because they have to travel a much smaller distance.
Yeah, the speed of light is always constant. So it's
speed of light?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, because radio waves are light.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The speed of light is always constant. So if something is further away, it's going to take longer to send and receive that signal. The geostationary orbit is much further away. Starlink is about 6,352% lower than a traditional geostationary internet satellite.
So in 1 second, a geostationary satellite can do 4 round trips, but in Starlink, it can do 280 round trips. And the difference there is just ridiculous.
And the reason it can do that is because it's so much closer to the person who is sending and receiving the signals.
Yeah, like we said, the light's not traveling any faster when you're with Starlink, but it's so much closer. And because there's so many of them, you won't lose data.
Yeah, so AKA, all of this means that the speeds you're going to get with Starlink are much, much faster than you're going to get from a traditional geostationary satellite. So for those who care about the numbers, most of you probably aren't going to understand this, but that's about 25 milliseconds of latency compared to about 600 milliseconds of latency, which is quite a lot.
POV, we're doing an ad for Starlink.
We're not.
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
And even compared to traditional cell towers, not the geostationary orbit satellites, traditional cell towers, even compared to them, Starlink is pretty fast, right?
But now we're going to get to the part where you guys actually clicked on this episode and how Starlink is saving Ukraine.
Yeah, and also keep in mind, geostationary orbit satellites, they can only cover one area. But Starlink can cover the whole world, like we were saying before.
Yeah, we've said that.
But also cell towers and the geostationary orbit satellites, because geostationary orbit is only over one specific location.
Yeah, so like when you're on a boat or a plane, you can get service.
What?
Like, so yes, because covering the whole globe is Starlink.
Yeah, exactly.
We said that. Yes, okay.
Okay. So how is Starlink being used to save Ukraine, you might be asking?
Yes.
So basically, in an attempt to disconnect Ukraine from itself and the rest of the world, Russia has been attacking and targeting critical internet infrastructure in Ukraine. So, for example, they are targeting and destroying cell towers, phone lines, etc.
So this makes Ukraine not able to communicate with each other in the army, and that is a major problem because communication is needed for a successful fight.
Yeah.
So Starlink has restored connections in Ukraine. It's a primary system of communication in the Ukrainian army.
Yeah. There's a little confusion over who's actually funding this. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister for Innovation, Education, Science, and Technology tweeted that Elon Musk was, quote, among the world's top private donors supporting Ukraine. Starlink is an essential element of our critical infrastructure. So Elon himself said that even though Starlink was losing millions of dollars on a monthly basis,
it's a great investment. It's good for the world.
He would continue to fund the Ukrainian government for free. But then it also seems that the Biden administration has also donated Starlink satellites. But regardless of who's funding it, it's good for Ukraine because Starlink, like we were talking about, all those benefits of the Starlink method, all those benefits are what's helping Ukraine. Starlink is a unique way to get internet, and it's actually ideal for Ukraine. And Russia has been trying to also target the Starlink and even in space, targeting the Starlink satellites, which...
Can they even do that? How do you...
under international law, no, but
okay, are they...
Russia's kind of throwing everything out the door.
No, I agree. We're not going to get into war talk, but I feel like even though 340 miles above the surface isn't insanely high compared to another satellite or anything, 340 miles above is what? 340 Mount Everest stacked on top of each other. Or no,
it's pretty high.
It's 100 Mount Everest stacked on top of each other. How is someone going to get something to destroy those satellites?
Other satellites.
Oh, actually?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's how you would do it?
Or just rocket. That part's not that difficult. But
okay, really?
The thing with Starlink is SpaceX is planning to expand it even more. So currently, there's a little over 4,000 Starlink satellites in orbit. But SpaceX plans to get 42,000 satellites in the next 2 decades, which is, according to my calculations, over 10 times more in the next 2 decades. 42,000 satellites compared to 4,000.
We're just going to be looking up and seeing a line of white dots everywhere we go.
Which brings up another topic of discussion, which is...
what happens when the satellites fall?
No. Well, yes. But also with people that are stargazing and people who do that kind of stuff for their research and universities when they're looking through telescopes.
Colt Inman was right. Whenever there's a good, there's a bad.
Yes.
It's wise.
Because the thing is, if you're taking a long exposure telescopic image, which is what most of the telescopic images are,
it has to gather pixels and data from a lot of different shots.
It's looking up at the sky for
a long time.
Can be hours upon end. Mm-hmm. And you have to make sure that there aren't any satellites in the way, which has a giant white streak across the image. Mm-hmm. Because you can predict the course of the moon and all these other planets, but you can't predict all the thousands of satellites that are in orbit.
I'm sure we can figure something out, a tracking system for all the
that's
satellites.
What we need. We need government regulation that is going to regulate.
Well, how is SpaceX going to do this? Because I feel out of all people,
this is an international issue.
I agree, but for example, what if we're trying to launch a lot of rockets and there's tons of satellites? How do we avoid course with that? And if we're putting this many satellites into the
this
world,
is uncharted territory. right?
This is
Like,
uncharted territory.
We've never really done anything like this before on such a large scale. It's difficult to regulate, especially when there's so many different parties involved and everyone has different interests.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be interesting how we're able to get everything in order and make sure that, because I mean, the consequences could be pretty disastrous, and not just your telescopic images getting ruined, but
No, there's a lot of bigger problems than that.
space junk, all this
exactly.
stuff. There's legitimate concerns with having so many satellites in orbit.
Like, yeah, I mean, and it's maybe, I mean, how good is this for the environment?
Yeah.
Like, how are we going to clear this for, like, space exploration or anything like this? If there's a border blocking something and you can't get by without tons of satellites whizzing by.
Yeah, I think people forget space is still really big. So
No.
it's not like...
We're not, no. Like, getting out of the Earth is...
Yeah.
I'm not saying the satellites are going to, like, once we're in the middle of space. Yes, I'm not saying that Earth's satellites are going to affect us. But, like, how are we going to... If there's 42,000 satellites in the air and we're trying to launch a rocket, how do you get by without a satellite, without not coming past the satellite?
Yeah, that's what I was just saying. We need regulation. We need a way to keep track of all the stuff that's in our atmosphere.
I know.
So that's a really hot topic of discussion right now.
Yeah, we should maybe do like an episode on a full breakdown of this. And I'm not sure like how realistic this is in like the close future, but like at what point does these satellites not just being able to spin around with the Earth, because they're not spinning at the same rate the Earth is, like what if like can you take these satellites down?
Yeah, that's another thing. How to safely do, because at some point, even right now, there are decommissioned satellites that serve no purpose because they're old, and in the future, if we're going to launch even more of these satellites,
there's going to be so many.
That problem is going to become more prevalent as time goes on. So how to safely deorbit satellites, because you can't just leave them sitting up there, and eventually
they could fall down.
Eventually, they're going to fall down, because in order to maintain speed, because even in space, there's still some friction, because especially in low Earth orbit, it's not a total vacuum. So eventually, it's going to slow down, and it would drop. So places like the International Space Station
would be so catastrophic.
have to keep pumping themselves back up to make sure they don't fall. So how to safely deorbit, where to deorbit. There's lots of things to
and like remember that episode we talked about like building that like pole that went all the way up to like lower
space elevator.
The space elevator, yeah. The space elevator. How does that become a possibility with all this stuff?
Yeah.
Like, there's so much to consider.
Space policy. Yeah, space policy, and how as
our lives are too basic for this.
As technology becomes more advanced, how to do space policy and who's going to be leading in that, how to, make that come to fruition. Mm-hmm. Is it the UN, all this sort of stuff. But that is to be determined. That is not our jobs. That is...
I was just going to say, like, this is too much to think about. Like, there's just, like, so
yeah.
Just don't worry about it, guys.
Yeah, so do you want to head into trivia?
Let's head into trivia.
Okay, so for those who are unfamiliar, this is our trivia round where Will and I both ask each other 5 questions. Whoever gets the most right wins the episode. All right.
If you're new, I also always win every single time.
That's not true at all. I think I'll start us off.
Yeah, like always.
So the original iPhone was released in 2007.
I knew that.
At the time of the release, how much did it cost for the base 4GB version?
Okay, if I get close, you have to give it to me.
Round to the nearest $100.
Oh, okay. $400.
It cost $499, which rounds up to $500. So that is incorrect.
Dang it. Well, you know what? Whatever. HTTP stands for
Hypertext Transfer Protocol.
Okay, bud. Such a nerd.
Okay. How many is a baker's dozen?
Oh, 13.
That's correct.
I think those are both questions we've already asked each other. I'm almost certain you've asked me that before.
I haven't asked you that.
Okay.
You've asked me that one before.
Okay. What animals are pearls found in?
Oysters?
Yep. I'm starting off with easy ones. I got some harder questions, bud.
So do I. Okay. This is an easy one. All right. I would be sad if you didn't get this.
Dude, he every single time he says.
What does NASA stand for?
National Aerospace or Aerodynamic Space Association.
Close. You got the second word incorrect. It's National Aeronautics and Space
I
Administration.
knew that. Oh.
Okay, wait. So, what, quick pause.
2-1.
Okay.
What was the first episode? What year? And you're pretty good at this because you always somehow manage to pull these out, even if you don't know it.
This is true.
Okay. What year was the first episode of South Park aired? So it's been a while
I've
for a while.
never even seen South Park.
I know, neither have I. But it's like it's been around for a while.
1970.
Oh no, I'll give you another guess. It's more recent.
Oh, okay. 1998.
I mean, the fact that he was that close.
What is
1997. I mean,
it? Dang.
this kid. Okay. Your
Okay.
turn.
What is? Wait. Quick stop.
2-1.
It's 2-1.
Yeah.
Oh, we're both faster. Okay. What is Delhi short for?
That's just a good question.
I know. I was just curious, and I was like, "What is Delhi short for?" Because it sounds like it's short for something, and I looked it up.
I don't.
Delicatessen.
That's a hard one. Okay.
I know.
This one is also hard, but it's good for knowledge. So, who is like often credited as building the first car?
Henry Ford.
No. Carl Benz.
Carl Benz. Okay.
Mercedes Benz.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, so I have to get this right or else you win.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay. So this is a different trivia question. It's a little different. I am going to give you 3 facts about a country, and you have to tell me what the country is.
Okay. I like it. I
Okay.
like it. I like
Fact
the idea.
number 1. The primary colors in its flag are red, white, and blue.
Yeah.
3 primary colors.
Okay.
Fact number 2. It was formerly owned by the United States. It was acquired from Spain in 1898 by the United States. It's no longer under the United States. It's its own country. It's its own country. Okay. Fact number 3. It consists of 7,641 islands.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
What is your final guess?
Okay, so but the Bahamas aren't red, white, and blue. But I'm thinking, okay, I actually have a good guess here. The British Virgin Islands.
No.
The Caribbean.
The Philippines.
Philippines. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I was gonna like the Caribbean. Okay. Well, just for fun, it's like the first time Blake's ever won, guys.
That's not true.
Soccer players, like professional soccer players, have how many players on the field at the start of the match for each team?
Including goaltenders?
Yes.
11.
Okay.
Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Let's go.
I'm sorry. I should have known the NASA one. I was close. You know, I was there, but I wasn't
I feel
there.
like we should do more of those country questions. Those are fun.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Blake's a nerd because he does GeoGuessr all day.
What?
Like about countries, not like a
All
like
right.
a country knows all
this
this
is
stuff.
fun.
Yeah, if you're seeing this on video, this is the first time we've ever done this, but we're probably not going to. I mean, we're probably not going to upload this.
On video?
We might.
Yeah. We're experimenting.
Okay. Love you guys. See ya.
Bye.